Hi everyone, this is Sarah. I'm just going to talk through a few of these handouts briefly. I'd like you to print them and really read them and look at them and think about them. These are from week 2. I'm going to talk about them briefly in order to set them in context a bit and show how they tie together. So right now we're looking at an information timeline, and this lays out how we share what we know about the world with each other. So if you kind of put on your information goggles and try to see the world through how we produce and share information with each other, this might help you understand the timeline. And the other thing that's helpful is to think about it in terms of a major event. September 11th comes to mind. So the day of September 11th, think of the ways that we were communicating. There was news reporting, there was people were blogging about it, people were being interviewed, the eyewitnesses, and it was being reported on as it unfolded. And that usually happened through the news, through the internet, and it was firsthand accounts that really were just trying to document what was happening, and there was less analysis. And the analysis piece really doesn't come until later. It takes time for us to investigate, to understand, to analyze, and then come up with some sort of conclusion that we then want to share. So who is doing that work is laid out in this, like at the beginning, the day of the event, in the days following, weeks following. It was mostly journalists doing that work of interviewing and writing and sharing of the information. And then as years passed, and I'm looking now at the 1 to 2 year range here, that's when we start to have more analysis, answering the why, how, these sorts of questions, so that we can understand and share new knowledge with each other and maybe prevent something again. And then this is where the scholarship tends to be really specific. So you can't take the entire event and summarize it in a journal article. Usually researchers are looking at one tiny specific aspect of something, whether it be a disease that they're researching or a condition or an event like September 11th. They're going to be looking at one small detail and seeing if they can understand it better and share that with each other. And therefore us. So if we are looking for analysis of that event, we might look to newspapers for how it unfolded as it was happening, but we also are going to want to look to researchers and experts and see, what was their take on it, what was their analysis, and what are our thoughts on it as well. So I hope that helps set this in context a little bit. Next, I'm looking at this types of periodicals sheet here. Again, please print it and read it. It talks about different types of periodicals. Periodicals just mean that it's a information source that is published repeatedly. So like books are typically published once. Sometimes a second edition comes out, but usually it's just published once. Periodicals are things like newspapers that are published daily, weekly, sometimes quarterly, so every few months. Scholarly journals tend to be published either monthly or quarterly, typically quarterly. And the information that you can get from each of these types of periodicals differs, and this will, if you read through it, really help you understand what you're looking at when you're searching online. Because one of the first things you need to ask yourself is, what is this thing I'm looking at once you find it? Is it a newspaper? Is it a journal article? What is it? And that can be tricky sometimes. So hopefully this will give you a nice overview and jumping off point. The industry trade journals, I really love these. These are so great, especially if you're doing career exploration, because industry trade journals are much more practical. They are directly related to jobs that people do, and they read them in order to keep current in their field. So everything from aviation science to library science. There are several trade journals that I read, monthly to keep current in the field. So depending on what area of study you're going into and what career you're going into, you might ask around and also try to search out what are the major trade journals that I might start reading. Lastly, this is the scholarly publication cycle. There is a video about this. There's a tutorial about the difference between scholarly and popular publications. And I think the thing that we want to keep in mind with the scholarly publication cycle here is, how do people do research? And that is at the primary or secondary research phase. So when they are doing primary research, they are testing hypotheses, they are gathering evidence, they are doing analysis, and then they want to share their newfound understanding. And that's when they start going to conferences and sharing their new knowledge, and then they want to publish it. So then that's when they publish it, typically in journals. And this would be now I'm looking at the journal article part of the scholarly publication cycle here. But something that's not represented on this handout that I want to point out to you is that most of this primary research is grant funded, and a lot of it is funded by the government. So if I'm a researcher, I'm going to need some funding to further my research, whether it be in a lab or whether it be, going out and doing interviews, whether it's looking at documents that I'm analyzing and trying to understand better. I'm going to need some funding. And so I will write grants and look for funding. And a lot of this is publicly funded, either by public universities or by government grants. And so later, and in fact in the news just today, I'll point this out in my brief introduction. I'll point you to a news article or a news piece that I heard on NPR this morning where, once these journal articles are published, they're no longer in the public domain. So in order to get access to them, you have to pay for them. And so that is a bit of a catch-22 there, where the government's funding all of this research, but then in order to have access to the findings of that research, to the new understandings, the new knowledge, we have to buy it back. And we have to buy it back through these journal subscriptions. And typically individuals can't afford them. And so that's where libraries come in. Libraries pay for them. And that's how you can have access to them, is through library databases. So I'm going to leave you to print these handouts and read them carefully and work your way through the rest of the video tutorials linked here. And please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have questions, and have fun with it. This is a great week full of really interesting content. So I look forward to seeing you online.